Hello and welcome to the Young Film Academy podcast, the essential podcast for teenagers looking to find their way into the creative industries. And this week, I, Dan Allen, am joined by James Walker. Welcome, James. How's it going?
Thanks, Dan. Great to be on again.
God, it's very exciting. Very excited to be back. And I'm wetting myself this week, James. As I'm sure as I'm sure you can imagine. Would you like to tell us why and who we're going to be speaking to?
I will, because we're really lucky this week to have an amazing guest to come and share their experience on editing, which is something that's very close to your heart, yes. Dan. I'm going to blow your trumpet for a second. So Dan is a very multi-skilled filmmaker in many departments, but has a kind of real focus, obviously, both as a director, but also in post-production. You are a fabulous editor. I've worked with you many times, and you are highly skilled in this area. And we've got one of the best in the business today. We have Eddie Hamilton, who has edited, he started with X-Men First Class, was his first sort of, one of his first big break movies, Kick-Ass 2, he did the Kingsman movies, he's done, if not all, he's done many of the Mission Impossible movies, and he most recently edited Top Gun Maverick, which I personally thought was an amazing reboot that
so
was
good.
How to make something that good off a sort of piece of intellectual property, which is, was from a different era and had so much expectation. Oh my God, it was just absolutely unbelievable. So we are going to hear, hopefully, all about what makes great editors, Dan.
Yeah.
So Eddie will be joining us from, in fact, his chauffeur-driven car, coming back from the studio, working on the latest Mission Impossible movie. So the beginning part of the audio is, we lose him occasionally as he's driving through London traffic. But then the second half, we are in the studio. So hopefully we will get better audio at that stage. So bear with it, people.
100%. So without any further ado, welcome to the podcast, Eddie. How's it going?
Hello, team. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
It's very exciting. As mentioned before, I do a lot of editing as well, so it's such an honour to speak with you. I thought I'd actually start by asking a fairly open question, which is, what do you enjoy or what do you love the most about editing?
Great, thank you for the kind words, Dan. Editing, I think, is the best job because you have ultimate power over everything the audience sees and hears, from the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie. Every single thing goes through your fingertips in some form or other. And there is no film without editing the footage, unless you film it with a single shot, which some films have been done, but most films you film coverage. So you film wide shots and medium shots and close-ups and specials on bits of action. But the movie only really comes to life when you edit it. And so it's a position of immense power, but also a position of immense privilege, because you're the first person on the planet to see the film come to life. You're the first person to see the footage off the set. And when you start to kind of put the blocks of the shots together on the timeline, you start to create the chemistry of the story and the relationships between the characters and the conflict and everything that makes a movie great. And then you start layering in sound effects and music and creating the film that the audience is going to watch. And so I love that, the evolution of the process. When we start out, it's very raw and it's rough and it's a bit long. And then we evolve it, and you get it tighter and better, and you show the film to an audience, and you listen to the reactions, and then you go back and look at the movie again and recut it again. And like anything creative, it starts out a bit rough and ready and a bit long and a bit lumpy and uneven. And then as the time goes by, over the weeks and months or years of editing, which we do on these movies, the film slowly comes into focus. And you refine it 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 over months and months and months and months, going over the same scenes over and over again to improve them incrementally, little bit by little bit by little bit, until it's as good as it can possibly be. And so it's great fun. It's wholly creative. It's puzzle solving. It's visual storytelling. You're using all the the tools that you have as an editor of pace and rhythm and sound and dialogue and music and visual effects to tell the story. And so I love it, really. I do think it's the best job, as I said.
Yeah. I want to ask about sort of what that sort of first step is like when you get the footage. But just before we do, I was wondering if you could sort of divulge a little bit into sort of where your responsibilities end and someone else's begin. Because you talk about, obviously, sound effects and music and all these different elements that come together to make the finished film. In that first pass, how much are you putting into the time? Like, how much of it is like you having freedom to like throw ideas in, or are there sound people that are already on board that are already sort of like delivering you sound effects before you've even cut a scene? Or do you get sort of a first pass at doing all of that with temp music as well?
It varies on the project and on the director. If you're working on a lower budget project, then you'll try and do a bit more of the heavy lifting, on the Avid Media Composer timeline, or whatever software you're using. On a film like Mission Impossible or Top Gun, so much of it is reliant on sound to tell the story that what we actually end up doing is working on the film silent for most of its life. When we're refining the edit, we're just working on it totally silent, and we're imagining the sound effects and the music. And what we've learned is that average sound is worse than no sound. So if you show a sequence to a producer or a director and the sound is just a little bit rough and ready, they will be a bit alarmed by that. And we can make it pretty polished in the Media Composer. And I do a lot of sound mixing, so I know how to make stuff sound good. But to make the right sounds that have a kind of movie polish to them, it's an extremely time-consuming process and a very detailed process. And so for the action sequences, I'll just work on them silent. And then for the dialogue, we just have dialogue. We don't have music. We just introduce the music a lot later, once the scene is working as well as it can with no music and no sound effect. And then usually I'll wait for the sound team. And honestly, this has only happened really in the last 8 years of my career. I've been doing this for 30 years. So you get to a certain point in your career where you're working on movies with the budget to hire a sound team, and they will deliver way better sound effects and layers of sounds. And also everything I do is in surround sound now. So I'm constantly kind of mixing with surround sound elements and building up that kind of 5/1 soundscape. But with a director like Christopher McQuarrie, he likes to work on stuff silent and introduce music a lot later. With someone like Matthew Vaughn, when I did Kingsman or X-Men First Class, he likes to temp. He uses a lot of temp score. He likes to feel the film with sound effects and temp score if he can. So we'll spend a bit more time and layer in temp score, but it really depends on the director. I sometimes have an idea in my head of what the music might end up being, and sometimes for my own experiments I will take music from other missions or from Top Gun or whatever, and I'll layer stuff in just to give myself a sense of what the scene might feel like with music. But then when I play it for Chris McQuarrie, I just turn off the music. But I have an idea in my head of what might work. And then the interesting thing about being an editor on these movies is that you're the central hub for all the creative decisions in post-production. So the composer will send music to you. The sound team will send music to you, and you're building the soundscape in the timeline, which you will then screen for audiences. So people will watch the movie with a play out from the Media Composer. And so I'll do a mix that is a theatrical standard mix. And then there will be a point where we go, right, we want to do a proper temp mix, and we'll go away for a week into a proper 5/1 theatre, and we'll mix it in a kind of down and dirty way. And then we'll screen it to an audience of several hundred people. Up to that point, it's been maybe 50 people, for a friends and family screening. And then right at the end of the process, the sound mixers get involved properly, and you end up mixing for, you're mixing for like 2 months on the film. In a proper, and you're mixing Dolby Atmos, and, you're color correcting in Dolby Vision and stuff. But up to that point, everything, the hub of the whole creative post-production is the Avid Media Composer timeline. So all the latest visual effects there, I do temp color there. We're layering in sound from the sound team and music from the composer, and making all our creative decisions, organically every day for months and months and months with this kind of living, breathing film on the timeline that we're working with.
And how long, Eddie, might you be working on a movie like Top Gun Maverick? Like, for your perspective, how long?
Yeah, that was roughly 2 years, almost exactly. So I started in August 2018, and we finished in July 2020. So yeah, almost exactly 2 years. And it was about a year of principal photography. And then, so I was editing for that year, and then another year of editing on top of that. So 2 years in total. And Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning I was working on that for 3 years. But we were filming bits of the second movie. So it's not an entirely accurate representation of the time it took to make one film. But that was a very complicated movie. It started out at nearly 4 hours long. The first version we screened for anybody was about 4 hours long. Wow. And then we got it down to about, 2 hours 42. So we cut like nearly an hour and 20 minutes out of it from the kind of very rough director's cut that we had down to the final cut of the movie.
Wow.
But yeah, that's the length of time it takes on these films. It's a very long amount of time because they take a long time to film. They're very expensive movies, and so you need to make them as good as they can possibly be. And allowing the film to bake properly in post-production and editing is the secret to getting a film from great to kind of outstanding, which you aim to make every movie. Is just literally every frame of the movie has to be world class, from the very first frame of the logo to the end of the credits. And so you're drilling down on that slowly over months and years to get it really, really great.
Can I so I think the privilege of what you said earlier, that thing of watching, so much time and effort and human endeavor to create the raw footage. And you are the first human being often who's kind of assembling and seeing these sequences. Do you get that rush of emotion, when you put a sequence together in the right way to create a feeling for the audience? Do you feel that emotion yourself? Do you get this kind of spine tingling, punch the air moments?
Yeah, 100%. You get it, you're aiming for it when you're sketching the scene out, and you're building it shot by shot. You've got a sense of where it's going because you've watched all the footage, and you can see how the director has been dialing in the actors to certain performances or giving options for the edit. And on that note, it's interesting because the editor, so what happens is you'll have on a big film, you may have 400 to 500 people working on making the action, the magic between action and cut happen in front of the camera. And then all that collected effort of all those people goes down to the editor. So it's just one person who then gets to take everybody's work, all the creative departments and the sound, and marry the picture and the sound, and then start to build the film. And you start building it. And then what's interesting is you may put 5 or 6 shots together and look at them and start to feel something and go, aha, there's something in here. I'm feeling connected to the characters just for these few seconds. And then for me, the real trick is to just find a way to get to the end of the scene, however bad it may be. Don't kind of revise it too much as you're going, Try and fill the timeline up with shots so that you get the scene as written on the page in a rough form. And then the fun begins, because then you can start refining it and improving it. But the hardest bit is going through the hours and hours of footage and then building a first version of the scene. So, for example, on Mission, I may have 7 or 8 hours of material for a 2-minute scene, for example. And so going through all that and breaking it all down and then making all the decisions just to get to a first pass is like a Herculean amount of work. And then refining it is the fun stuff after that. And then, of course, you have a version, and then you show it to the director, and then you and the director will work on it and refine it more. Then you'll bring in producers, in this case, Tom Cruise. He will come in and then watch the scene with total objectivity, because he hasn't been in the weeds with us, with the scene for weeks and weeks like we have. And then he'll say, all right, I'm feeling this, I'm not feeling this, try and make me feel this more. Those are the kind of notes that we get. They're not specific notes of like trim 6 frames off this shot. It's like, I want to feel more like this, And
the corollary of that question is almost, do you get to a point where you can't see it anymore?
Well, yes, but part of the trick of editing is fooling your brain into seeing it fresh. And there are some tricks you can use. Like, firstly, you're constantly refining the scene. So you're very rarely watching the exact same scene. You've usually changed something about it to try and steer it in a direction. Even if it's just trimming 6 frames off a shot, right? You're still seeing it with a change. The other thing to do is invite anyone who's not involved in the film, any fresh pair of eyes, into the edit room to watch it with you. And you will instantly see the film through their eyes and feel it differently. The other tricks that you do is, you go and sit on the sofa rather than stand at your edit desk or sit at your edit desk. You press play and swivel the TV round and sit on the sofa and watch it. And you can't just press stop and like recut it. You have to just sit and watch it. You can turn it into black and white. That's a clever trick that allows you to see it differently. And the other thing that we do is...
ask if you've ever done it black and white.
Yeah, we do that. And the other thing we do is we flop the image. So you'll just like rotate it 180 degrees. And then your eye is not like expecting to travel to the cut points. You're having to kind of retrain your brain to watch it back to front. And then you get another fresh perspective. So all those tricks you can use to allow yourself a kind of fresh set of eyes, fresh opinion. But the real way is just to show it to people, whether it's one person, 10 people, 50 people, 500 people, and you'll instantly feel if it's working or not. And you feel it fresh then,
And is that with sound? I was going to say that when you show it to those people, are you showing them ideally with no sound because it hasn't had that quite work yet? Or you need to obviously present the dialogue, I assume, for many scenes to work?
Yeah. Well, wherever we're at, but yeah, we show dialogue. The first version of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning that we screened for about 70 people, the 4-hour edit was dialogue only. So no sound effects and no music for 4 hours.
I want to see that.
So most of the movie is silent, like large parts of the film are this very spiritual experience of sitting with 70 strangers in silence in a cinema, just watching it with no sound. But then it's pure cinema because it's pure visual storytelling, and the film should make sense purely visually. And most of the audience who watches these movies doesn't speak English, right? Or a large percentage, shall we say, of the audience. So they'll be reading subtitles or listening to a dubbed version, but ideally you should be able to watch the film with the sound off and still understand the story. That's pure cinema. And with Top Gun, we watched that movie many times with no sound to check that it worked entirely visually. And you felt the emotion for every scene without hearing the dialogue. It should be like, you should just be able to allow the film to wash over you without needing to listen to it. Anyway, it should be like a purely emotional experience from beginning to end. That's what we're attempting to create for the audience.
Can I ask about a particular sequence? I mean, I loved so much about Top Gun Maverick. I just thought it was amazing. But there's a sequence in there where Pete Mitchell is demonstrating that the mission can be accomplished. And there's a fantastic scene where he suddenly undertakes it all and they can't believe he's about to do it. And then the decision to go inside the plane, and suddenly the sound almost drops away and you get this very clunking, very mechanical sort of sound effects of this, almost makes it feel like an old-fashioned bit of kit.
Yeah.
I mean, I just thought that was so genius. I was with him in the moment. It was amazing. Can you just talk us through, like, at what point was that kind of your call? Was that a sound call? Like, how did that kind of moment play?
What we're always trying to do is put you in the subjective point of view of a protagonist of the movie. So you have to tell the story from the point of view of Maverick. And that means sonically that when you're inside the cockpit with him, you're zoned into his concentration. So what you can hear is his breathing and the efforts of him fighting the G's and pushing the stick left and right, which is why you feel connected to the character. And then obviously when we're outside, we're hearing the kind of blast of the engines and the awesome afterburners, crackling and all that stuff. And the music it's like a synth tickle with these long, like horn swells, which underscores how the students or the young pilots feel watching him, of this sense of awe and disbelief coupled with hope that he might make it, and like growing anticipation that he set this ridiculous time of 2 minutes 15 seconds and he might actually do it. But it's the simple premise of, am I in the protagonist's point of view visually and sonically? And that's what we try to do. So almost the entire movie of Top Gun Maverick, apart from maybe 2 scenes, is in Maverick's point of view. There's a scene where Rooster and Phoenix are on the tarmac just after they've done the death spiral, and he tells Phoenix, Rooster tells Phoenix, he pulled my papers. And we're not with Maverick for that scene. But then immediately after, we're with Maverick and Cyclone's shouting about, the hard deck and all that. And then there's another scene where we're with Hangman and Coyote, and they're looking at the Top Gun 86 photo, and they realize that Rooster is Goose's son. So, but virtually for the rest of the movie, you're in Maverick's point of view. You're with the character. And, if you watch the scene with Iceman, we're with Maverick when he walks in. We're with him when he sees Iceman's wife struggling to articulate what's happening. Then when we cut into the study, we're with Maverick when he enters. We're in his point of view. Whenever Iceman starts typing, we always cut to Maverick looking at the screen. And then you cut to his point of view of the screen. So we're constantly in his point of view. Even, when we're in the bar and he gets thrown out of the bar, and you hear Great Balls of Fire playing, we're with him when he looks in the bar, and everything is like from his point of view, seeing Rooster play the piano, and then we're remembering the flashback to Goose playing Great Balls of Fire in the first movie, and the flashbacks to the F-14 ejection and all that. But you're always with Maverick. And so that is how you get the audience invested in a character, is this subjective storytelling, which Tom Cruise does so well. Like he's done it since Risky Business, right? And all of that. That's why Mission Impossible feels like it's being driven by Ethan Hunt, whereas some people are like, it's got to be a team, right? And it is a team, but you have to have a protagonist who you follow through the story emotionally. You can't just follow a team, and so you have to be with James Bond or with Indiana Jones or with Ethan Hunt. Do you see what I mean? So you have to follow that protagonist through the story when you're working with a movie star. I mean, there are movies which are ensemble movies, obviously, where they kind of share the lead role, like Magnolia or something like that. You know what I mean? But it's not. He's a supporting character in that. But when you're working with a protagonist-driven narrative where there is a movie star in, it's like Indiana Jones. You want to follow Indiana Jones. You want to follow James Bond. And when you're not with that protagonist, you're like, when am I going to get back to the protagonist? So we do struggle a bit with Mission, because I know that when you watch the TV show, it was a team experience, and the audience does love the team, but you have to have a protagonist who you're following through the adventure. Do you see what I mean? So that is what it's like when you're working with a movie star like Tom Cruise, and the kinds of films that he makes, and the kinds of movies that you're buying a ticket to see. You want to see a protagonist narrative. You know, if you look at Jerry Maguire, or if you look at Edge of Tomorrow, or if you look at Jack Reacher, or if you look at, Valkyrie, or any of these movies that he's made, it's always protagonist-driven narratives. So we're really drilled down into that, and Top Gun Maverick as well, of course.
And I think that Tom Cruise I read that he recommended you to Joseph Kosinski, the director. So he brought you across from Mission Impossible.
That is true, yes. He was very generous to do that.
Which is super cool. Yeah. I mean, and so I suppose my question was, what do you think he saw as the sort of your special sauce? What do you think is the thing that differentiates you as an editor that he wanted?
I'm not. It's interesting, isn't it? I'm not sure I do anything particularly different to other editors out there, but I am very enthusiastic, and I stay enthusiastic and positive through the whole process. I love movies. I love giving the audience a great night out at the movies, and I never lose sight of that hunger and passion for great cinema, and being reminded of what it's like, the emotion of sitting in a cinema with a crowd of people and the lights going down and a movie starting, and that tantalizing excitement that you might be in for like a terrific 2-hour ride, which is just the best. It's like my church, I enjoy the movies so much. I have done, all my life. It's just a wonderful spiritual place for me. And it's interesting when you meet other like-minded film fanatics, there's this unspoken understanding between you that you just get it. And Tom Cruise is one of those. He loves movies, and he lives to entertain an audience. And when you collaborate with people who share that love and passion and dedication and quality control, that's the thing. It's like you just want every frame of the movie to be as fantastic and as great as it can possibly be. Every sound effect, every note of music, every frame has to be art if you can. And I share that passion with Chris McQuarrie, the director, and Tom Cruise, and so that honestly goes a long way. I do work very, very hard. I don't take shortcuts. I am very thorough with going through all the footage. It's enormously time consuming on these movies. So in Mission Impossible Fallout, we had a scene that is just under 10 minutes at the end of the movie with Tom flying a helicopter. We shot it in New Zealand. They had 80 hours of footage for that. And I know it's mind blowing. And I remember, and then in the movie, it ended up being about 9 minutes, 50 seconds of screen time. So to go through all that and break it all down and build a version 1 of that took me about 4 months. But the thing was, I was working on other scenes from the movie at the same time. So what I would do is I would work in the car, because Paramount very kindly allow me to, they get a driver to take me from home to the studio every day and back. So I'd work for an hour in the morning, or an hour and a half in the morning, and an hour and a half in the evening, just going through helicopter footage on my laptop. And so it took about 4 months, doing it in that like small chunks of time. And then, but that experience really prepared me for the monumentally complex puzzle of working on Top Gun Maverick. The aerial sequences on that we filmed for probably about 5 months. And it's about 50 minutes, 50 minutes of the film, which interestingly is about a third of the movie. So a third of the movie takes place in the air and 2/3 takes place on the ground. And when I timed out the first Top Gun from 1986, coincidentally, that is almost exactly the same time split of like a third of the movie happens in the air and 2/3 happens on the ground. It seems to be a good balance in terms of action and ground story emotion and character dynamics and interplay and romance and rivalry and friendship and sacrifice and all those things that you associate with Top Gun. But it was, we had over 800 hours of footage for that movie.
And can I just ask? And I was asking, you go through this? Because I did see a photograph, I think, online where it's you and your team from Top Gun.
Yeah.
And there's there's about 10 of you, it looked like. So 10 human beings. And one of the things we like to do on this pod is to sort of demystify kind of how it works and what these roles are. So maybe, were you couldn't have been watching all 80 hours, or were you personally?
No,
how does it work?
I did go through. So I have a team. I have on Top Gun, I had a first assistant editor, 2 second assistant editors, a trainee, and then a music editor, visual effects editor. So it was the usual gang. Like on Mission Impossible, I have 2 first assistant editors, 2 second assistant editors, a trainee, visual effects editor, visual effects assistant editor, music editor, post-production supervisor. So those are 10 of us who work on it. And my team will make sure that the footage comes in to our Avid Media Composer shared storage system. They check it all. They make sure all the metadata is accurate. They sync the sound. They sync the cameras if we're using multiple cameras. And remember, on Top Gun, there were 6 cameras running at all times on each pilot. Sometimes they would send up 2 planes, so then there would be 12 cameras going. Sometimes they would send up 4 planes.
Oh my God.
2 of the planes would have cameras strapped on the outside. So they would have a plane on the wing and a plane on the nose and a plane on by the undercarriage. So the amount of footage that came in was quite extraordinary. So when I'm watching it all, if I'm grouping the 6 cameras together, I don't have to watch them individually. I'm watching like 6 streams play. So that kind of speeds up the process to a certain extent. Plus, they couldn't, for the fixed wing external cameras, they couldn't start and stop the cameras remotely. Inside the plane, they did start and stop the cameras remotely. Like the actors could actually start and stop the cameras, and they saw a red light, so they knew. But outside, they would either take off from an aircraft carrier or they'd take off from a naval air base, and they would start the cameras just before the jets took off, and then they would fly to the location, do the moves that they were doing, flying through the canyons or whatever, or doing their pop up and the dive down, and So I would have all that footage, and then they would fly back. So you would get like 20 minutes of flight with a camera where the plane's just going level. Then you would get 20 minutes of cool action shit, and then you would get another 20 minutes of flying back. Probably not, because the cards only lasted 44 minutes. So it was probably like 15 minutes, then 15 minutes, then 15 minutes. And then if the cards ran out on the way back, it was fine, because the planes were landed, and then they would offload the cards. And from
that
the cameras.
that first watch through, I was just wondering, are you just sort of sitting there absorbing it? Do you sit down with a notebook from the start, or are you already interacting with the footage and sort of marking things out?
So what I do is I kind of actively watch the footage. So I don't sit in a screening room and press play and write notes. What I do is I do watch it all, right? And because you never know what's going to be good.
Yeah.
And anything that I see that is like, that lights a spark in my brain of like, that could be useful, I put it on a timeline, and then I start breaking. So the timeline is split up into little beats of story or beats of action that I think might be useful. So shots of planes turning left and shots of planes turning right, shots of planes climbing, F-18s. Anything which is dynamic, planes flying fast left to right, planes flying fast right to left. Then inside the plane, I'm going for anything with a dynamic action, because the only thing that shows sort of dynamic movement is the horizon moving behind the pilots. If they're flying straight and level, the shots are actually not that interesting. So and because they have a mask on, we can take footage from anywhere and use it anywhere in the sequence and put a line in the actor's mouth.
Interesting.
And so a lot of that was on the final mission, if you watch a lot of those shots when they're flying through the canyon, I'm picking really dynamic moments where the horizon is shifting, because the camera can't move. On the first Top Gun, because they shot it on the ground with back projection, Tony Scott could move the camera around the cockpit to kind of create energy, but we couldn't, because the cameras are bolted into the F-18. So the only way to create visual energy is if the actors move their heads. So I did say to them after the first week of photography, I said, you have to
more head
exaggerate your head movements. Like if you're looking around, like really exaggerate your head movements so that there's just something more interesting. So they were training with Top Gun pilots, and they're trained to kind of minimize their use of their energy and minimize the dynamic flight of the plane, because it can go faster if it's not twisting around, if it's going straight and level. So they had to kind of unlearn some of that and make it a bit more exciting for the movies.
How fascinating. And they're in a plane with, I think they're in a plane with two cockpits, aren't they? So they've got a pilot in front, and then there's a camera pointing backwards that looks like they're the pilot.
So they have 4 cameras pointing at the actor in the back seat, and then 2 cameras pointing over the shoulders of the actual pilot in the front seat. And the actual pilot is wearing the same helmet, so that if you see Phoenix, she's flying in front of Bob. You'll see we had a female Top Gun pilot who was flying in Phoenix's helmet and had her hair done to feel like Phoenix's black hair. So it looks like you're looking over Phoenix's shoulder, but actually you're looking over a Top Gun.
So you're getting two for the price of one.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of how that worked. But it was just a monumentally complex puzzle. They also shot all the interior shots of the pilots about 6 months before they shot the exterior shots of the planes. So for ages, I just had interior shots. Yeah, and I was cutting to storyboards and previs, and sometimes I would even get model planes on sticks and film them with my iPhone just to generate some shots of planes moving, just to feel like what was going on. It was so time consuming, and I would do seconds a day of the movie when I was building the actual edit. I remember the final mission took me about 3 months to build. Probably, I'm trying to think, it was probably around 18 minutes of action, and that's working flat out every day, because there's so many options for everything, and you're constantly comparing like 20 different shots for this 1 second piece of story. Is this the best shot?
I was going to ask you about
it's
that.
Just so hard.
In terms of shot selection and stuff, obviously there's 2 sides to this question. One is, you mentioned you've got the story beats from the script. So how much are you saying okay, I see plane turns left, let's just go and look for the best version of that, versus okay, look at all this footage I've got on my timeline. Are there any new things that I could bring to the sequence? Are you generally trying to stick on beat, or are you letting the footage inform how the story should unfold?
Because you're right. So you're almost always, everything changes the moment that you roll cameras on something. It's very rarely close to the script. It sometimes can be. In a dialogue scene, you probably are. But in an action scene, there's so much random happenstance, with the way that the light interacts with the cast, or the way that a stunt will happen, or if a plane is going 700 knots and you're stood on the side of a mountain with a camera with a big long lens on it, you're just going to shoot what you can get of the plane. So I'm always looking at the footage and going, what's the best, most dynamic shots, and then what story can we create out of them? And there is always a plan. They're trying to shoot a plan, but the plans are almost always too long, and the movie has to be really tight, really, really tight, to make it exciting and dynamic constantly. You can't rest for even half a second in these action sequences. So every single frame has to earn its place and has to be very, very good, 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
And when I'm building it, usually I'll mark the shots that I think are 10 out of 10, and then 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10. But I'll put them on different layers of the timeline so I can see at a glance which ones I think are the best ones. And then build the shots, build the sequence. But eventually, in the fullness of time, all the kind of 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 shots pop out of the timeline, because they're just not good enough. And the movie has to be incredible.
Yeah.
You know, from beginning to end, literally, it has to be outstandingly good in order to earn the privilege of people paying money to go to the cinema and watch your film. You know, that's the kind of quality control that Tom Cruise demands for his movies. And I share that, and I love it. And it's partly why I'm very honored to be working with somebody who cares that much about the end result, because I know that we have the resources and the time to generate like world-class images and sound for the audience. But you're always like leaning into what the footage is telling you about, which is, you know, what the best stuff is. So you're keeping an open mind about how those sequences will evolve.
And I've seen online, Eddie, you're very generous, actually, I think, with your resources, hence you're coming on this podcast to sort of encourage younger people and the next generation. And I saw that you shared your timeline from, I think, was it Mission Impossible? It was Dead Reckoning, wasn't it?
All the timelines are on there. No, you can go to eddiehamilton.com and then my website and click on timelines. And I've uploaded quite a few timelines from the different movies if people are interested.
It's amazing.
Sometimes a bit rocket science, to be honest, and quite overwhelming.
It is.
When you don't start out like that. You start out on a gradient, baby steps. You start out simple. And I can't give anyone a violin or a drum kit and expect them to play world-class music immediately. It takes time. You know, the theory of 10,000 hours to become good at anything. So a human being, to be good at anything, it takes about 10,000 hours of practice. And 10,000 hours is about, so if you work Monday to Friday for a year, that's 200 days. So if you do 10 hours a day, 2,500 days. So if you do 10 hours a day, 250 days is Monday to Friday for a year. If you do 10 hours a day, that's 2,500 hours in a year. So it's about 4 years of practice, 10 hours a day to get really good at something. And that seems overwhelming when you're young, because it's like a quarter of your life. You know, when you're 18, you're like, well, I'm never going to spend that much time. But actually, that is what it takes. If you want to be really good at football or really good at tennis, or if you want to be really good at sailing, or, you know, it's that much dedicated, focused time to get really, really good at it. And you just need to imagine that it's going to take a while to get to this place. But, you know, I was working on very low budget movies and short films and TV shows and news programs and documentaries and all kinds of stuff for 20 years before I got a call to do Mission Impossible. So it wasn't 4 years, it was 20 years, you know? And now I've been working with Tom Cruise for 10 years more than that. You know, now I've been doing it for 30 years, which when you're 18 just seems like forever. You know, it's like, gosh, you're going to be an old man by the time you do that. And yes, that is the truth. You know, I'm 51, so I'm an old man compared to an 18-year-old. And but that is how long it takes to get really, really good at something. And so when I see those timelines, it all makes sense to me, because I've been working at it. So don't expect to be that good quickly. You know, take your time and learn the craft. But if you're very focused about it, you'll slowly get there.
I think what it showed me, and I'm not an editor, is the meticulous, because I was going to ask sort of what you think is the temperament that, you know, for a young person listening to this who's thinking, is this the right thing for me to go into? I mean, I looked at the overwhelming detail, and the color coding was unbelievable, and I'm a bit of a labeling fanatic. So I suppose I'm thinking, if you're someone who's just not meticulous, this probably isn't for you, right? Like, is that, what do you think of the temperamental things?
It's like, I'm a bit like you, so I like to be really organized, because part of the editor's job is to be able to know all the raw footage and to be able to find it very quickly. So I spend a lot of time building select rolls of bits of story, like I was saying, and labeling everything, so that if Tom Cruise or Jerry Bruckheimer walks in and goes, show me all the shots of a jet turning left in this environment, I have them all stacked up ready to go. And I can go, this is the one I chose for the scene for this reason. But here's 10 other ones. If you prefer one of those, we'll put that in. But that takes a long time to be that prepared. But it means that when you're with the VIPs, if a director walks in or producer walks in, they never have a lot of time to spend with you.
Yeah.
So you need to move the needle very quickly for them and make progress in the room. And all that prep time and organization and labeling and, it means that when they come in, they can tell that you've been really organized and you're not phoning it in, and you can evolve the sequence very quickly. And I do that with dialogue scenes as well. So I have my team make what's called line strings, which again sound mind-blowingly time-consuming, and they are, which is every line of dialogue from every scene in the movie is split out into kind of all the wides, all the mediums, all the overs, and all the closes. So I can listen to a single line of dialogue from every single angle that it was shot.
Wow.
And I can just press play on the timeline and hear 70 different deliveries of a single line. And quite often we'll swap out a line delivery, for example, on a close-up. If the director wants a slightly different, nuanced, emotional delivery, we'll go in and we'll take, line reading number 43 out of 70 and slip it in to the close-up. And you would never notice that it's different, but we get a slightly different emotional resonance from that line delivery. And so when we're going through dialogue scenes, we're meticulously going through every single option for every single line of dialogue. Sometimes we're even swapping out just 2 or 3 syllables. So you have to be very organized. Now, not all editors are, and that is why you have a team of assistant editors who help you, because editing it's partly about organization, but the truth of it is that it's about emotional visual storytelling. And the emotion of the story is all the audience cares about. They don't care about if you were meticulously organized.
If you labeled bin 57.
No,
yeah.
Oh, wow, I bet that guy had his ducks in order.
They don't care. So they just want an emotional experience. That's it. They just want to leave their life for 2 hours, go on an emotional journey with a protagonist or with a team of characters, and learn something about the human experience or the world which those characters are in, or feel certain emotions, and come out with a kind of satisfied, I'm full feeling at the end of a movie where I've been to a different world or a different part of the planet, or I've experienced characters going through certain emotions, so I don't have to risk going through them myself, but I felt like I was with them on that journey. And that's all the audience cares about. So as an editor, your job is the guardian of that experience, that emotional storytelling, at the expense of everything else, And so the biggest trait that an editor needs to have is an understanding of storytelling, and specifically visual storytelling, and how certain compositions and performances and shot selection and rhythm and tempo and time, all that creates an emotional response in the audience. That's the most important thing. So I love the combination of storytelling and technology, because I'm a total nerd and I like computers, and I find that side of it kind of curious and fun to noodle with as well, and all the latest technology that comes out every year, and how can we incorporate this into our workflow and all that. But ultimately, my job is the guardian of emotional storytelling at the expense of everything else. And on a film set, everyone else cares about their tiny little part of the world. So costume cares about costume, and makeup cares about makeup, and sound cares about sound. Cinematography, they care about how the light looks and how the composition is and the lens choices. Actors care about how they look. And so the only two people who care about the story are the director and the editor. And the director is also worried about making a schedule and getting on with the crew and managing the actors' temperaments and all that stuff, which the editor doesn't have to worry about. All I have to worry about is looking at the footage that the crew managed to get the day before and figure out what is the best material in there to tell the most emotional story for the audience. And if I don't have something, telling the director and the producers, we need to film this before the set goes or before the actors go. So yesterday I spent a day on the set, for example, with a splinter unit, which is a small unit, getting close-ups of Hayley Atwell reacting to certain things that we were not able to get in the main unit photography because there was so much going on that day and we missed two vital little close-ups. So I went and I got a 2-second reaction to this and a 2-second reaction to that and a couple of other inserts and a few other things. And then I know that I can get exactly what I want. And the director always approves it. Chris McQuarrie is always watching, or he'll come to the set and dial it in. But I say, right, we need a reaction to this. We need a reaction to this. So we'll go back while the set's still there and get it. And that's also part of my job.
Are you there often on set? Are you doing or does your team do assemblies as they're shooting so that exactly that they can come pick up things that they might have missed?
Yeah. So I do all the assemblies and I ask my team to also assemble in any free time they have so that we can see different versions of scenes, or they can compare what they've done with what I've done. And we can all kind of learn together about the best way to tell the story. And if you haven't done any editing, if you're listening to this and you haven't done any editing, you won't really understand the power that you have as an editor to radically change the story and the pace and the emotional content and the order of the story, how information is revealed to the audience. Like, it's when you start digging into that and experiencing it for yourself, it's mind-blowing the power that you have to radically change and shape the way a story is told in the film. And it's very exciting as well. But if you've never done it, you won't quite appreciate, what the power of a cut is, or when you swap two close-ups over, or how you move scenes around and how you introduce a character differently, or how you use music to generate an emotional response, and when you use music, how you use sound, all that stuff, which is, you can do anything you want when you're editing. You're not tied down to the weather or costumes or where the sun is in the sky or how an actor is feeling about a certain scene. You can take the time, work, and create the magic of the story, and yeah, that's
I've always thought you're like the chef. It. You're the chef. And I've always thought it's a lovely place to be. Is sort of, you don't have to necessarily go out into the world and collect all the ingredients and grow them and do the farming and all that stuff. You basically start with all the ingredients on the table in the kitchen, but you are going to choose, you can ruin those ingredients. You can make them into something absolutely sublime.
Yes,
and
that's
I agree.
True.
It's I've always been attracted to the idea that it's quite, it's quite a controlled environment to some degree.
Yeah, very much so. And it's also the most cost-effective part of the filmmaking process. Editing doesn't cost much because it's a few people in a room with a computer. Whereas when you're on set, it's controlled chaos all the time. Anyone who's been on a film set will know that there's never enough time, there's never enough light, there's never enough money, and you're always pushing to try and make the most of all the limited resources that you have. Whereas there's a certain amount of freedom in editing where you have more time and you can free yourselves of that production stress and focus on the pureness of storytelling. And I will say, Chris McQuarrie, when he makes Mission Impossible, he really is just gathering ingredients. And we build the film entirely in the edit. A lot of these scenes, if you watch Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, like the airport sequence with all the intercuts, with all the different characters,
that such stuff is
so complex. And it's roughly sketched out on the page. Yeah. But we know that we will be intercutting it a lot more in the edit. But we're not worried about how it's going to intercut. He'll write the scenes out fully, and then we will worry about how do we intercut them? What's the most dynamic way of intercutting them later? So we are gathering the ingredients for the process of making the film in the edit. And you only really make the film in the edit. Like I said, the there's nothing for the audience to watch. You can't just show them raw footage. It would be boring. So you have to edit it, unless you're making 1917. You have to edit it to create any emotional reaction. Yeah. And Chris McQuarrie and filmmakers who very experienced filmmakers understand that you discover the film in the edit room, and not to worry too much about it on set, because any plan that you have will change radically usually when you get into the edit, and that's part of the joy of the process and part of the freedom of the process, but also something that you appreciate more the more you do it, about how much power you have when you're editing the movie to shape it. And yeah, so like the whole scene on the train at the end, when we're intercutting between all the different stories, I mean, the number of options we tried. You try every single possible combination of, do we start on Grace? Do we start on Ethan? Do we start on the widow? Do we do this? Do we go to this scene? Do we see Kittredge? Do we start on a close-up of the phone? Do we cut to Ethan on the bike? How long are we with Ethan on the bike? How long are we away from Ethan on the bike? Do we feel like we've lost Ethan from the character, from the story, which is true because we change points of view to Grace's / the White Widow's point of view for a large chunk of that third act of the movie, where we're with the character of Grace trying to kind of negotiate her way out of this problem. And Ethan is on the bike riding to get to the train. So he is not driving the story necessarily for those bits. So, you know, we start off, and it, like I said, you know, you start editing and it's always very rough, and then you dial it in, and over the days and the weeks and the months, you slowly get it better and better and better and better and better. Yeah, and then eventually you find the best combination, which the audience ends up seeing.
And I have to ask about the sequence, the incredible jaw-dropping stunt sequence, which follows on when he's chasing that train on the bike.
Oh yeah.
And for those people who haven't seen it, do take the time to go on YouTube and watch the sort of the 10-minute special featurette all about the making of this incredible stunt that Tom Cruise did, I think, 6 times in a day on the first day of principal photography.
That's true.
But I mean, what was it like for you to have that footage and to be the first person, or maybe were you in that instance? Because I know they trailed some on social media, like watching that put together for the first time. I mean, can you just describe the emotional journey?
It was, we were in Norway, and I was living with Tom Cruise and Chris McQuarrie and his team, his core team of people. And I remember when they went up to do that, it was August 2020, and we were all socially distanced and all wearing masks and, you know, all that stuff. And it was terrifying to witness, because I flew up in the helicopter to the mountain and I watched the takes happen. And it's very nerve-wracking indeed. And then I remember Tom saying, you know, Eddie, while you're here, you should put together a little reel showing all the prep that we've done over the months, because it was months and months of preparation to get to that point where he could safely do the stunt.
I suppose we should just describe to the stunt for the listeners who haven't seen it. This is the stunt which Ethan Hawke, the character, sort of seems to jump off a cliff on a motorbike and base jump while letting the bike go, and then and then at the last minute pull a parachute cord. But it meant that they built a ramp, and Tom Cruise literally goes off.
He only has 4 seconds after he jumps off to pull the parachute. So, to be honest, it's he really doesn't have a minute. He only has a few seconds. If he doesn't pull his parachute, he's going to hit the side of the mountain pretty violently. But yeah, it's quite spectacular. So that little behind the scenes clip that you saw on YouTube is something that I edited in the very first week of principal photography. I had all this footage from the behind the scenes team, and what Tom wanted to do is show Paramount Pictures a behind the scenes glimpse of all the prep, so that when they saw the footage, they appreciated the work that had gone into getting it, you know. And so what was released on YouTube about 2 years afterwards was a version of what I originally presented to the studio. I mean, I presented it to Tom first, and then he gave me some notes and we refined it, and then it was shown to the studio. But that was like a fun side project, because when they do these big stunts, there's not a lot of footage generated. They film all day and they get 6 takes of Tom jumping, which are over in 20 seconds, and there's maybe 10 cameras rolling, because there's behind the scenes cameras rolling as well as the hero drones and helicopters and things. And so you don't get much footage, so the actual editing of that doesn't take long. But so I have time, I have kind of emotional bandwidth to dive in and do something else, so that's why I was building that behind the scenes glimpse. And it was fun to score it using the music from Mission Impossible Fallout, rather than any new scores. I just dived into the Fallout score and repurposed the music from that movie to tell the story of the motorbike jump.
Well, it was absolutely jaw-dropping, and watching that for the first, I mean, it does make you the drone shot that's above him as he goes off, and they had to time it all perfectly, and then you just watch him disappear into what seems like an endless abyss.
I know, it's nuts, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh my goodness, it was.
Yeah. It was very cool, and nerve-wracking, but still, just a privilege to witness. And I will say that in the next movie there's way more advanced, complicated, dangerous stunts that we did. We filmed this huge aerial sequence in South Africa, and you can go on YouTube and there's a short clip of Tom Cruise introducing a screening of Top Gun, where he stood on this yellow biplane in South Africa, and that gives you a tiny sense of what we were doing. But again, we spent many months in South Africa filming that in 2020, the end of 21 and the beginning of 2022. Crikey, yeah, a long time ago now. And then the audiences will eventually see it in 2025. So yeah, that's how long it takes.
Long old journeys. And what was your journey as we sort of start to come back in time a little bit here, Eddie? Can you describe to us kind of your journey, your personal journey, sort of what you studied, did you go to film school, things like that led you to the career you have now?
So I was always obsessed with movies from the age of 8, when I realized that there were people's names at the ends of the films that I was watching on TV at home. And I realized, hang on, maybe people make films for a living, which is not something as a child, as an 8-year-old that you think about. You just see stuff appear on TV and it's kind of magic, And so I became quite obsessed with storytelling and filmmaking. And I remember getting books out from the library that were about filmmaking and listening to movie soundtracks and watching anything that came on TV about behind the scenes making of films. And there wasn't a lot of it. So anything that I managed to record on a VHS tape, I would watch over and over again. And, one of the things I remember seeing was behind the scenes of Return of the Jedi and the speeder bike chase, when they built an edit of the speeder bike chase using little models of Luke and Leia, and, and they edited it on video, and then they filmed almost the exact same sequence with the real actors. And I remember thinking, gosh, they plan it that meticulously and how they do it. And there was a documentary about behind the scenes on Star Wars. And one of the guy who invented the motion control cameras was a guy called John Dykstra, and he invented these cameras that could fly past model spaceships multiple times using the exact same camera move to create the amazing shots in Star Wars. And so I was obsessed with Industrial Light and Magic and all those incredible people, matte painters, model makers, photochemical compositing, all that stuff that created all this magic. And then when CG came along with The Abyss and Jurassic Park and stuff, just learning about that. But I did my GCSEs, I did my A levels, I did maths, physics, and chemistry A level. I studied psychology at University College London. There weren't many undergraduate film schools, but University College London had a great student film and TV society. And actually, I spent 8 hours a day making student films and TV at university while studying psychology. So what I would do is I would study from like 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. and do my lectures. And then from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., I'd just make student films and TV every single day. And I did that for 3 years. So it was almost like a bit of a film school, really.
With a bit of psychology thrown in.
Yeah. And I did the psychology. I did the bare minimum to get a 2-1. I did enjoy it, but it wasn't my passion. But it did allow me to live in London and make films, for fun, as part of this student film society. And then I did apply to film school. So I applied to the National Film and Television School, the Northern School of Film and Television, the Royal College of Art, and there was I would get down to like the last 7 or the last 5, and then there would only be 3 spots to study editing, or 5 spots to study. So I got constant rejection letters, which was very dispiriting. But I was quite young, like I was only 21 or something when I applied, and a lot of people applying were kind of 26, 27, so they had a bit more life experience, which doesn't make sense to you when you're 21, because you think, I've had 21 years of life experience, I know everything.
Yeah.
But you change so much as a person between the age of 20 and 30, and you won't necessarily understand that listening to this podcast until you get to the age of 30 and look back on the decade before, and you'll go, actually, I am quite a different person. I've changed quite a bit. And you'll have lived and loved and traveled and just had to experience a far broader range of emotions than you have done, when you're 20, which will feed into your work as a storyteller. So I do understand in hindsight why I was rejected from the film schools. Plus, I have a very commercial sensibility. Like when people said, what are your favorite films? I said Star Wars, Back to the Future, Aliens, Die Hard, RoboCop, Raiders of the Lost Ark. I didn't say Vittorio De Sica's Bicycle Thieves, or the Battle of Algiers, or I loved Hollywood movies, and those are the movies that really got me fired up. I remember seeing JFK in 1991 and just having my head blown away by the amazing storytelling in that film. If you haven't seen JFK, the editing won the editing Oscar that year. The editing and the way they use the different film stocks and the different speeds for the camera and sound and music, it's just sublime. It is so complex and brilliant, and totally deserved the editing award that year. So, but anyway, I got a job temping in London. So I joined a temp agency, and I would work at police stations typing up witness statements, or work in a bank doing presentations for PowerPoints, or eventually I got a job in a business magazine doing page layout design on Quark Express, which is an old piece of software that you used to use for doing magazines. And I did that for about a year, and I was so unhappy and so unfulfilled and just going through the motions of paying the bills that I said, right, I have to do something about this. I have to give myself a chance to succeed or fail in filmmaking, because it's all I care about doing. And I won't be happy unless I'm doing that. So I handed in my notice, gave myself a month to get a job as a runner in a post-production facility, and managed to do that. So literally finished page layout design on a Friday, and then on Monday I went in taking a huge pay cut, making tea in a post-production facility, age like, I'm going to say 24, perhaps 23, 24, maybe 23. And you don't spend very long making tea as a runner. If you have common sense and you pay attention and you're polite and you work hard, you move up the ranks. So I was promoted to assistant editor quite quickly, and taught myself how to use all the equipment in this facility, which included, early Avid Media Composer, digital nonlinear editing machines. And then when an editor was sick one day and they were desperate for somebody to take over, I put my hand up and said, I can do that. So I was given a chance editing with a client, and that was my first break. But again, I did a lot of Portuguese and Spanish sport television programs, and I don't speak Portuguese or Spanish, and I don't really like sport. But it's what they did at this place. So I had to edit a lot of these news programs very quickly. So I got very fast at editing, but I was doing stuff, I didn't understand the language. I had journalists with me who were kind of guiding the editing. But that wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I had to make the decision to leave that job and try and find a job on a low budget movie as the editor, being paid. Like, honestly, I think that first job I got was £100 a week I got paid. And then I did 3 movies after that for free, where I would edit promos for the Paramount Comedy Channel 3 days a week to pay the bills. And then I would spend 4 days a week editing short films and movies for free, just because I love to do it. And so I did several films like that. And then in 2001, I got a big break because Matthew Vaughn, very influential British producer, he produced Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, directed by Guy Ritchie in the late 90s, which were very successful films. He was making a movie called Mean Machine, which had Vinnie Jones playing football in prison. And they were looking for an editor for that film. And they were under such time pressure, they were actually looking for 2 editors, someone to do the first half of the movie, someone to do the second half of the movie. And wow. I managed to persuade Matthew to give me a chance, to give me a shot. And that worked out. And it led on to me working with him on Kick-Ass and on X-Men First Class and on Kingsman. So that one break that I got in 2001, and I'm still friends with Matthew now, and will make more films with him in the future, I'm sure. But that one opportunity, and people say it's luck, but luck is preparation meets opportunity. So I had worked incredibly hard teaching myself how to use this stuff and done loads of low budget movies and short films. And then I got this tiny glimmer of a job opportunity working with Matthew Vaughn. And I phoned a friend who knew a friend of his who knew some other producer who'd worked with him and said, there's this young editor who wants to meet you, and please would you, I'll sleep on the floor of the edit room, I don't care. And I did get to meet him, and I said, let me have a crack at this. I'm unproven because I've never done a film of this scale, but please give me a shot. And he did. And it worked out. And then what's amazing is the full circle of the story is when I did go on to work on X-Men First Class, which was in 2010 to 2011, I think. Lee Smith was the main editor on the film. And Lee had just done Inception for Christopher Nolan and The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
And he was about to go on and do The Dark Knight Rises and Interstellar, and obviously won an Oscar for Dunkirk. And so I got to work with Lee Smith for a year on X-Men First Class, which was amazing to see how somebody, he was 10 years older than me at the time. He's nearly my age that I am now. But the way that he interacted with Matthew, the director, and with the head of 20th Century Fox, Tom Rothman, and the way he worked on the movie, I learned a lot about big budget filmmaking from watching him and how he worked with the footage. And it was a true education. I'm forever grateful to Lee Smith for giving me a chance to work with him and share the editing credit on that film. But what was amazing is that the visual effects supervisor on X-Men First Class was John Dykstra, who was the guy who built the motion control camera systems for Star Wars, which I'd studied all those years before when I was 10 and 11 years old. And here I was in a room working with this hero of mine who was one of the founding members of Industrial Light and Magic, who created all the amazing visual effects for those films that we all loved in the 80s and 90s and still do to this day. And so it was just the greatest pleasure to be collaborating with him as a creative partner on this film, and then to ask him all my Star Wars questions, and for him to be able to tell me about how they blew up the Death Star and how they filmed the tractor beams and how they did the TIE fighters and the X-Wings and all that stuff. So that was an amazing experience. And then when I finished Kingsman with Matthew, that was when I got the call, the first Kingsman, the Secret Service, the very first one. In 2014, I think that was when I got the call to do Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation with Tom Cruise and Chris McQuarrie, and so that's when my career jumped up another level. at that point. So that was my journey into it, but never went to film school. So totally self-taught. And actually, even if you do go to film school, the realities of professional filmmaking are quite different to what you learn in film school. The theories are the same, but the realities and the expectations and the politics are quite different. So you will have to take a kind of few steps down the rung of the film industry and start at the bottom, making tea, getting coffees and lunches, and learning about how to interact with professional filmmakers and work your way up the ladder. But the real trick with the film industry is that the industry is a ladder. So you need to think about what ladder do you want to end up at the top of. So think about the types of things that you're interested in, whether it's camera or sound or visual effects or hair and makeup or special effects or wardrobe or set design, and start to work at the bottom of that ladder and work your way up. Because if you get halfway up a ladder and then you go, so for example, if you work in commercials and you travel up the editing ladder for commercials and then you go, oh, hang on, actually, what I really want to do is work in Game of Thrones, or I want to work on Mission Impossible, then you won't be able to jump across to the same level of ladder on a different project. You'll have to go down a few rungs and work your way
to go
back
across.
up.
Yeah.
And so which means a pay cut and more time. So if you're 18 years old and you're listening to this, really think about what are you interested in and what ladder you want to climb, and start climbing at the bottom of the correct ladder if you can. There's nothing wrong in changing. Like if you get to your mid-20s and you're like, actually, I don't like, working as an assistant director, and I find visual effects more interesting, then that's fine. You can change, but just be aware that you'll have to, earn less money for a bit and work your way up a different ladder. That's kind of good advice, I think, for people listening to the show.
Wow. Well, I mean, what a wonderful sort of tour through your career, and I think very inspiring. We really try and outline those kind of, because no one has the same progression. Everyone's got a different journey and a different story.
Everyone does, yeah.
So it's really inspiring for young people to hear that that you don't necessarily have to go to a film school to get in and have a career like you've had, Eddie, and very inspiring. So to finish us off, if you could travel back in time, we ask this of all our guests on the pod, if you could travel back in time and whisper one thing into teenage Eddie Hamilton's ears that is a piece of advice that you think would have done well for you, what would that piece of advice be?
I think it's 3 words. 3 words I would whisper to myself, and that is don't give up. It's that simple, because there are times in your life where the obstacles will seem insurmountable. And whether it's the sacrifices that you have to make or the financial hardship that you have to go through because you're not earning enough money, if you want it enough, that won't matter. Plan A is to succeed at what you dream of doing, and plan B is to keep going until plan A works, right? So I kept telling myself, don't give up. The other thing is it's last man standing, because the other people who are trying to succeed will eventually give up because it's too hard. But if you don't give up, then you'll be the one person who does succeed. And I did work incredibly hard early in my career. I sacrificed so much time with my family and with my friends. I was always working till very late at night, every day. And so I would miss birthday parties. I would often, miss the week leading up to Christmas. I'd go home on Christmas Eve, at 7 p.m. And then on Boxing Day, I'd go back to work. So, and that was like years of really hard work. My friends always knew that I was working and slowly climbing up the ladder. But I wanted it so much. I knew that I would not be happy unless I was creating something somehow. And editing really works for me personally. The combination of storytelling and technology is something I love to do. And I've worked, and I'm good at it enough to earn a living at it, and collaborate with amazing other storytellers. But I just kept going. So that's the advice. Just keep going.
Brilliant and so inspirational, and that resilience is a big note. What we say to young people all the time: yeah, if you get knocked back, put yourself, get up again and be last person standing. So, correct. Eddie, thank you so much for sharing with that. And we are going to share in the show notes. Your website is fantastic and has some very generous resources, including that wonderful page on advice for young people looking to get
absolutely.
in, which is brilliant. And so we'll be posting that in the show notes too. So, Eddie, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. It's been an absolute delight to hear about your incredible career, and thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on, guys. Great to meet you all. Cheers. Bye-bye.
James, I was nerding out the whole time there, and I felt spiritually seen as well from his love coming from like Star Wars and stuff like that. Like my love for cinema came from like Star Wars and Jurassic Park. It was very much like a Hollywood, the Hollywood machine. I love Hollywood films. So just hearing his experience working on literally the biggest films that are coming out right now is just amazing. And obviously the listeners won't be able to see, but he was standing in front of the screen that had like the Paramount logo behind it, because he's literally working on Dead Reckoning Part 2 right now. Which is amazing. As we speak this very second, he's working on that film.
So what were I suppose, as someone who really works in this area, you're a brilliant editor yourself. Like, what were your big takeaways from all of that?
I loved the refresher tricks, ways to trick your brain into re-experiencing a scene almost as if for the first time. Like I'd sort of accidentally discovered the black and white trick when I was editing Blood and Honey 2. I was like, oh, if I make it in black and white, and then it just feels like an artisan movie, and I'm sort of feeling it anew for the first time. It made me really respect the images as well. There's something about turning something black and white. It just made it feel like a very prestigious movie. So hearing his like additional tips and tricks for that, I thought was really cool. That process of being meticulous, I think, would just really stuck with me in terms of how thorough one is, which is something that I personally just found that as an editor, I feel like I've essentially gotten slower and slower and slower as I've become more and more meticulous and just wanting to just not miss a single frame of footage. Like just not taking any chances and just really not allowing my brain to forget about that good moment I saw a moment ago. Like my timelines end up with all the good bits sort of like stacked up, everything that could make the scene really good. And it is just that process of sculpting that I think is a really good image that he sort of talked about. You start with something that's like big and clunky and sort of rough, and then you just slowly shape it over time. And it is just that process of it taking time just to get it closer and closer to what it needs to be.
Which is kind of like script writing as well. I mean, actually, which is sort of where I come from. That sense that you start, you've got to get that first draft done. It's not going to be great. Get the bad draft out of you, but at least it is a thing, and then it is the block of marble, and then you can start to shape it and hone it, and not being too precious and hoping that it's going to be perfect. I suppose you're not editing a scene the first time trying to make it perfect. You're just bashing through, get things roughly in places, and then allow the process of honing and going back and looking again. I thought that was really cool.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I was trying to imagine. I mean, when you are working with so many good people as well around you, and like to have that much footage of Tom Cruise doing his thing just must be so cool. But when you talked about having almost 30 takes, to choose between, albeit you're not going to necessarily use the wide for any given moment, but also just think about like, I can't imagine Tom Cruise doing that many bad takes ever. So
you're not. Yeah, it's true. So you can't just say no to easily to say no to 8 of them. You're you're just dealing in nuance, and it becomes. I mean, I agree. That was one of my big takeaways. Was actually, at Young Film Academy, we see one of the big challenges for students with the editing is they just get a bit bored. I mean, it's just purely watching back the level of material, which is why we always talk about a shooting ratio, right? We say, don't go and do 20 takes of everything. Go and do 3 takes of everything, and then the edit process will become so much easier, because we've heard so many young people who kind of say, I shot all this footage and then I got halfway through the edit and I just got bored and I couldn't finish and I just left it behind. Whereas actually, if you can do 3, you're much more likely to go. But when Eddie was talking about the helicopter sequence,
God, yeah.
80
hours, was it?
80 hours. So I mean, that's if you do 10-hour days, it's taking you almost 2 working weeks just to watch the footage. That's even before you've even begun.
Yeah.
And then managing it. And as I say, if you look at these timeline videos that Eddie does, which are brilliant, by the way, and I'm not an editor, but it was incredible. They're like works of art. The meticulous labeling and binning and this tracking and the discipline, just because of the sheer volume of material.
You can watch I just did some maths. You can watch the Lord of the Rings extended editions 8.5 times, and you would have just about watched all of the footage.
For a 10-minute sequence.
That is going to be turned into a 10-minute sequence. I mean, yeah, it's just to have all that footage, because it's got to sink into your psyche a little bit. Like, yes, you need to be organized and sort of like get on top of it, but like, you need to absorb it and like feel it and stuff. And I think it's that thing of like, you just need to keep moving forward. I think it's easy to give up because you just keep seeing the mountain, but all you really need to be seeing is like, okay, what's the one step that you're taking forward today? And then next thing you know, you look back over your shoulder and you're like, wow, look how far we've, traveled up this last week. Whereas if you just keep looking up as sort of, how vast everything is, then I think that's when you can get overwhelmed and end up abandoning your film, which you don't want to do. Otherwise,
no, I think that's absolutely right. And also, interesting to hear that there are he works with a team, which is, they are assistants without the same level of experience that Eddie's got through so many years. And that these are the kinds of positions where you can work your way up the ladder and end up. And then obviously if you forge personal connections, you're good, you work hard, all those things that he was talking about, then that's when you find you start to build relationships, and then you move up, and then you're on a movie, and then you get your break. And that's exciting for people looking to get into this world.
And what he was saying as well, which I actually heard recently on another sort of editing podcast, is just this idea of like choosing your ladder, because people will pigeonhole you is the real 100%. Shame. Like, unfortunately, despite how many transferable skills there are across like editing different things, they are slightly different. But like, I think one knows as an editor that you are capable of going and doing that thing, although you might need to just practice, like do a couple of them just to get into the swing of it. But it's the same sort of storytelling, rhythm, pace, energy, like feeling, skill set that you're using. But people see you as someone that works on a particular thing. So you do need to be a bit careful. I know now that there's a big world of like YouTube videos, and there's a whole world of YouTube editors, these editors that cut for these big names. On these platforms, but that is its own world. You could do 100 of those videos and no one's going to go, Jesus Christ, we need to give this guy a feature film, like at all, unless you've done a feature, which is why then you have to sort of go back and go back a few pegs. And what, he didn't say you have to go right to the bottom, but you do have to generally go back a few steps if you want to travel sideways, because people see you as the most recent things that you've done.
Choosing the right ladder was brilliant advice, and that thing of not giving up, right? Which we've heard so many times on this pod when we've asked this of people with very successful careers. Nobody has had an easy ride. There's just nobody who's just gone, well, it was great, I just started doing it and it was amazing, and then that phrase we use a lot, the cavalry's not coming. Even when you've made it, it's never as made it as you might think it is. And I thought that just keep picking yourself up, keep at it, keep working hard. That resilience message is a really important one.
Absolutely.
And enthusiasm. Eddie was so enthusiastic, wasn't he? I mean, talking with him, you could just see how much he loved what he did, how much he loved movies. And that was infectious. And it was interesting that he thought that was kind of one of the qualities that Tom Cruise picks up and goes, well, that's why I want this editor to edit Maverick, because he's been working on the Mission Impossible movies and he's great and he's got that, as well as all the other skills. That is infectious.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and you can feel that energy. You mentioned, didn't you? Yeah, that Tom Cruise, like him and Tom, sort of shared that real love and that real passion, and you could feel it even in that sort of our brief window with Eddie. I think you could really feel his enthusiasm, which I'll be honest, like if you go to some film sets, it's normally the students that are bringing that kind of energy. It's normally the people that are like, wow, it's my first film I'm on, and that they're just like really sort of bringing that. And you try to have that still, I think, is so key, and to constantly remind yourself of why you are doing what you're doing. And like I find this, directing, you've got to be energized and enthused and remember why you're doing what you're doing, because otherwise, filmmaking's hard, as we also say at YFA, right? Filmmaking's hard, so you've got to remember that love and that passion, and retain it. And I think for that to be the thing that has brought him to the top, I think is the most beautiful thing ever. Genuinely,
it was beautiful. You really had a sense that Eddie would kind of want to do that, even if he wasn't paid for it. He would just do it because he loves it so much.
Yeah,
and it was totally beautiful. What an absolute privilege it was to speak to someone who's worked on such amazing scale things, and that thing of talking about every frame from the first logo you see. Mm-hmm. To the end credit, every frame has to be world class.
Yeah.
That's a high bar. It's a high bar, Dan.
It is. Oh my god, yeah. No, as he was saying this, my brain just sort of like I would just suddenly start like retreading over, obviously, the film I'm directing and editing at the moment, and just being like, oh my god, yeah, I've probably got quite a few frames I need to trim out of this.
Not world class at minute 62.
Yeah, but in fairness, that is that first draft stage, so that is expected to be the case. But yeah, I mean, if you are working on something that big, with that big of a star, with that big of a budget, then yeah, that is the bar you've got to bring as the editor, right? Everyone else is trying to do the best possible work they possibly could on this big scale production, and his role and the role of his team is to make sure that they only select absolute 10 out of 10, and for it to work cohesively and tell a story that is effective emotionally.
Totally. So really, really inspiring. And have we got a question, Dan?
We do, James. We have a question from Tom, who's 14. Tom says, I'm about to start editing my first short film, and I didn't know what editing software to use. What would you recommend?
Well, you are the man, Dan. Go on.
I've been waiting for this moment on an old podcast.
He's knuckle cracking.
My fingers. I'm knuckle cracking here. The first thing I would say is, if it's your first film, it doesn't matter too much. Don't worry. Don't beat yourself up, is my first thought. Most editing software is going to do the job. I like to think of it as asking, which word processor should I use? The moment you frame it like that, people suddenly go, oh, well, they all just sort of process words. Because if you use Pages, which is, Apple's word processor, or if you use Microsoft Word, or even like Notes on your phone, neither one is going to make you write an article worthy of being published in the Times. It's your skill and it's your ability that's gonna do that. So the software is a small part of it, but really that practice and putting in those hours, as Eddie was talking about, is what's going to make you a really good editor and understand what it is that you're actually trying to do with the footage. And that's, rhythm, pacing, how effective it is emotionally. All those things are more important than the software that you choose. If you are heading for the big dogs and you want to be an editor on feature films, then Avid Media Composer is where absolutely everyone ends up. It's got a bit of a steep learning curve, but they all sort of work the same way. So if you started on a different program now, but if you definitely want to be an editor, then that's sort of like the program that you should sort of learn and use at some point. And if you don't now, then at university you'll get a chance to learn it. All the others work absolutely great. I know we use Final Cut, which I love. Final Cut, I've cut like so many features on Final Cut, and we use that at Young Film Academy. That's a great program. You can start on iMovie, is free if you've got a Mac. I'm sure there's some free ones on Windows. I don't know what they are. Premiere Pro is used quite a lot as well in sort of corporate world, which is fine. But yeah, whichever one you've got access to. Now, the only thing I would say is some free programs like iMovie are a little bit limited. There's certain things you actually can't do in terms of manipulating text and having space in there. So ideally, you want a program at least on Final Cut level.
which so Final Cut, DaVinci's got a free one actually, so
DaVinci's really grown, hasn't it? A lot of people, because it's a free version of DaVinci that's available. Whether it'll be free for forever is another question, but it certainly is at the moment.
100%. Yeah. So maybe if you don't have a budget, then DaVinci. If you've got a bit of money, Final Cut I think is such a beautiful, easy experience to learn editing as well, and you can do high end stuff with it. But otherwise, if you want to be an editor rather than director, maybe go media composer.
Brilliant.
Yeah. There you go.
Thanks, Dan. What a great wrap up. So there you go. Young editors out there who've listened to Eddie, who want to edit the next Top Gun movie, the next Mission Impossible movie. Yeah. Hopefully this has been useful.
I hope so. I found it useful, so I feel like it's got to be for
not just useful, inspiring. Tell you what, I quite want to be an editor. At least an editor, you get to sit in a sort of quiet room. You don't. That's what I've always. You don't have all the kind of There's not quite all the personalities. What Eddie was saying. You don't have quite all the issues that a producer has to deal with because the ingredients have already largely been gathered. So you get to sort of almost put on. It's like cooking in your kitchen. You put on a bit of music. You can cook. You can cook. You don't have to sort of fight through the crowds.
Absolutely. Right. Take care, guys. Enjoy yourselves.
Thanks.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.